Thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming out tonight. My name is Brian White. I'm the co-president of Green Hudson, and we're very happy to have Eileen with us tonight, talking about plastics and how to get them out of our lives, what we must know, and how we can.
And I wanted to tell you, before I introduce Eileen, just the shortest story you've ever heard. And this is, it's a folktale. Once Elephant was walking through the prairie when she came upon a tiny hummingbird lying on its back with its feet in the air. Said, "My dear hummingbird, are you all right?" "I'm just fine, Elephant. I'm glad you didn't step on me." "Well, I am too, but what are you doing lying on your back with your feet in the air?" "Well, I heard that the sky was going to fall, and so I am lying here just waiting to catch it and hold it up." How absurd to think that a tiny little bird could hold up the sky all by yourself. What are you thinking? "Well, I'm not going to do it by myself, but I'm going to do my part." That's very wise. I think I'll join you. Bonk. And that is the story of Hummingbird and Elephant. And the reason I tell you that story is because it is very easy these days to feel overwhelmed and powerless. The more we learn about climate crisis, the more we may feel there's nothing we can do. And in fact, 57% of people in this country who were surveyed said they don't think there is anything they can do. And that's a very hopeless and powerless feeling. But I have learned that just doing my little part, using my talents, not getting a degree in something scientific, I can make a difference. And I don't feel powerless. I don't feel hopeless. Now I'm going to introduce to you this wonderful woman who I'm so happy to have met, Eileen Ryan. She is the president of the Beyond Plastic group of Boston, and she is also a committee member of
Plastic Free Mass.
Plastic Free Mass,
Yeah.
which is a group that she says we should also join as Green Hudson, and I agree. And she's in charge of the virtual Beyond Plastic group as well.
So Elise is going to show you a short clip, an animated clip of a film by The Story of Stuff. They produced an incredible feature-length film called The Story of Plastic, which is what got me to be so involved with Beyond Plastics.
You've probably heard about a giant trash island in the ocean. Or that poor sea turtle and the straw. Maybe you've even heard how plastic is being found inside the fish we eat. The plastic crisis gets a lot of attention, but the headlines usually focus on the plastic that ends up in the environment. And that's just part of the story. The truth is, plastic has a whole life cycle that's hidden from view, one that harms people and the planet from start to finish. Let's start at the beginning. Plastic is made from fossil fuels like oil or fracked natural gas. Extracting those fossil fuels and turning them into plastics creates a lot of pollution. Pollution that most often affects marginalized communities nearby. As we've gotten better about using less oil and gas to power our lives, the fossil fuel industry found a lifeline in plastics. In fact, oil and gas companies are doubling down on plastic production, with plans to build or expand over 300 petrochemical plants in the US alone by 2025. But these companies already produce more plastic than we can use. So where's all that plastic going? A lot of it's flowing into new markets, in places like Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Because more than any other product category, plastic isn't driven by the demand for it, but by the supply. Corporations like Unilever, Nestle, and Procter & Gamble are aggressively marketing single-use plastic products around the world. These companies go to places like Indonesia, where I live, and push their products onto communities that just aren't prepared to deal with all that plastic. Maybe they're used to using natural packaging. Maybe they live on a tiny island without a system of waste collection. And on top of that, countries in the global north are shipping their own plastic waste into these countries too. When you add that all up, it's no wonder so much of this plastic ends up in the environment. And globally, that's where a whopping 32% of plastic packaging ends up. 40% goes to a landfill, where plastic just piles up for future generations to deal with. And 14% is incinerated. Incineration is a nasty business, producing toxic smoke and fly ash. These super expensive facilities depend on plastic to burn everything else. It is oil and gas after all. So they want to see more plastic, not less. Yahoo! Then there's recycling. Unfortunately, it's not the solution that many people think it is. Just 14% of plastic packaging gets recycled, and only 2% is effectively recycled, meaning it becomes something as useful as before. The rest is downcycled into something worse. And most recycled plastic is only recycled once, before ending up in landfills, incinerators, or the environment anyway. So it turns out that we can't burn, bury, or recycle our way out of this problem. And we can't just scoop all that plastic out of the environment either. That's like trying to bail out a bathtub with a teaspoon while the tap is on full blast. So how about we turn off the tap by shutting down the plastic machine? That means passing policies that create systemic change. Like phasing out the single-use plastics that pollute the most, ending the fossil fuel subsidies that are fueling big plastic, and holding companies responsible for the plastic waste they create. That's how we can achieve our vision of a zero-waste future, where all of our products and packaging can be reused or repaired, effectively recycled or composted, and ultimately how we create a sustainable, circular economy that works for both people and the planet. Visit storyofplastic.org to learn more and take action.
All right, so yes, my name is Eileen Ryan, and I am the leader of Beyond Plastics Greater Boston. So Beyond Plastics Greater Boston is a local group of Beyond Plastics. So 2 years ago, Beyond Plastics decided to start all these what are called local groups and affiliates. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But what is Beyond Plastics? So Beyond Plastics is based at Bennington College in Bennington, Vermont, which actually happens to be where I was born and raised. So it was really funny after I saw the movie The Story of Plastic, Judith Enck, who is the founder of Beyond Plastics, told the audience that she was going to be offering a course on plastic pollution in February of 2021. That's when I signed up for that course right then and there. As soon as that info session was over, I signed up for the course. It started in February of 2021, and I've been involved ever since. So they started a speakers bureau that summer. I said I would do that, and then when they started the local groups in 2022, I said I would lead one for Boston. So this is their website, www.beyondplastics.org. I highly recommend it. There's a lot of amazing resources there. If you're working on legislation, bills you might want to pass in Hudson, there's information there. There's lots of petitions to fill out. Any kind of action you want to take, you can go there. I actually was involved with plastic pollution before I got involved in Beyond Plastics. So I saw the documentary film Bag It. You know, you're getting the sense that these documentary films really influenced me. But at my local library in Watertown, Massachusetts, the movie came out in 2010, but I think it was a couple years later that some activists with Watertown Faces Climate Change, although that hadn't quite formed then, but this other group that I'm part of there in Watertown Citizens for Peace, Justice, and the Environment, screened the movie in the library, and I saw it, and I was like, whoa, there's something I can do. I can work on one thing. I can work on passing a single-use plastic shopping bag ban, which I know you did here in Hudson, which is excellent. And my friend Leslie Evans and I put together a brochure that we handed out to everybody. Well, not everybody in town, but we had them at the library, we went to the senior center, we went to all the schools with these brochures. We got the local bank to fund canvas bags with their logo on it and a design of Leslie's. But Leslie did the artwork, I wrote the copy. It was supposed to be geared for children, but it was actually great for all ages. So we didn't make two different versions of it. But this is how Leslie shows how the plastic bag goes down there. Leslie also designed the Plastic Kills posters over there, and the Plastic Equals Toxic, Fossil Fuels, and Chemicals. So we have done a lot of work together. We're both pretty creative and like to do this kind of work together. All right, so this is what really motivated me after seeing the story of plastic. 50% of all plastic ever produced has been produced in the past 20 years. I couldn't believe it. And plus you see these images in the movie of riverbanks just lined with disposable diapers and the trash in Asia that's totally out of control. So then I was like, I have got to do more. I have got to do more. And then I actually screened the movie that winter. So last week I gave this talk to Watertown Citizens for Peace, Justice, and the Environment. And I decided to put my slides into these categories: war, injustice, and the climate crisis. And then I also have a health section at the end. So how did this all start? How did we start producing so much plastic? Plastic was invented in the late 19th century, and then there was Bakelite at the beginning of the 20th century. And in 1926, PVC polyvinyl chloride plastics were invented, and at first they were just used to make golf balls and shoe heels, like boot heels. But during World War II is when plastic production and pollution really started to take off. So they started using, this is an image showing Rosies, the women who worked in the factories during World War II producing cockpit heads, I think is what those are. So why did all of a sudden they need plastic? Because there began to be a shortage of some of the natural resources. So nylon starts to replace silk, plastics are replacing natural rubber, and this December I had the great pleasure to go to Honolulu, and I was there on Pearl Harbor Day, and it was amazing. So there were actually original Rosies who are still alive, were in their 80s and 90s. There were vets there who are over 100 who were at Pearl Harbor, the bombing in 41. But I met this one Rosie who was in her 80s, but she had been a child picking milkweed during World War II. I had never heard this before. So milkweed was used in life preservers. So that now is all polyester with polyurethane foam. All right, so back to how much plastic has been produced since 1950. These kinds of images are overwhelming. The color on the screen from my angle isn't that great, but maybe you have a better view of it from over there. And it's all ending up, as we saw in the little animated clip, much of it's ending up in the ocean, in the atmosphere. So this again reiterates that fact. There's more than 10 billion tons produced, and half of the amount was produced in the past 2 decades. Now we're going to go to some ads. So this is all about the takeoff of plastic. So after World War II, they've got these facilities up and running. They've been using all these chemicals. So Dow, DuPont are two of the big chemical companies that still are involved in plastic production, right? So they start making plastics for everything. As you start seeing plastic dishes, cellophane comes into play, and then you start seeing synthetic textiles. So, we'll talk about this a little bit more, but textiles are a huge part of the plastic pollution issue at this point, because a lot of clothing is now made with synthetic fibers, which are plastic. I'll talk about that more as we go along. So how did you teach people to start throwing stuff away, right? This is the invention of the throwaway society. This image was in Life magazine, I think in the early 1950s. Does it say, is it 51? I don't know. I don't remember what year it was, but people had to be taught. So my mother never got into this, right? We came from a household where it was waste not, want not. My mother and grandmother said that over and over again. I didn't learn this other saying, use it up, wear it out, make it do or do it out, until I was in my 20s. But that was the mindset that most people had, especially people who grew up before World War II. So it took a lot to get people to start throwing things away. And as we know, there is no away, right? There is no place called away. It's going to come back to us no matter what. This is a picture from Greenpeace that I really like, but I have never seen a beach like this, and I am so happy I never have. One of the reasons we don't see beaches like this in Massachusetts is one thing is we have better waste management systems, but we're also not in a place where the currents work in the same way as in places in the Pacific, which is where you see a lot more of this. And a friend of mine who works for Surfrider said a lot of the beaches here get cleaned up in the mornings. But I've been on a lot of beaches in Massachusetts where I know people haven't been cleaning them. All right, so this is a chart that I really like because it shows how much plastic is just single-use plastic packaging. 40% of all plastic being produced today is just single-use plastic packaging, which I think we could get rid of right off the bat. And that's part of what Elisa was talking about with the Planet versus Plastics, the Earth Day theme, trying to reduce the amount of plastic being produced by 60% in the next several years. And then I want you to look, I'm actually really concerned about building and construction because I'm seeing more and more houses incorporating plastic doors, plastic cabinets, plastic flooring, and it's toxic. But then again, I also want you to note that textiles are the 4th largest contributor to plastic pollution.
When you
All
say
right.
packaging, you're talking like plastic bottles, plastic plates, like.
Yeah, anything that you would throw that's a one-time use.
Okay.
But you know, stuff for shipping things too, like Amazon is a huge contributor to plastic pollution, and they don't need to do that because in India they have a law. They are not allowed to use plastic packaging. Amazon is not allowed to use plastic packaging in India, and they manage it just fine.
Use straw or something?
Straws are also single use.
No.
Oh, straw. No, they use a lot of paper, and they use a lot of there's some really cool kind of cut and crinkled papers.
Yeah.
Not just that crinkled stuff that you've seen, but actually 3M just developed a really cool it's almost like accordion-like brown paper. I have a really great video of it, which I could send to you, and maybe you can send to everybody who came today. So what are plastics? You learned a little bit in the animated film. They're made from fossil fuels and chemicals, which is why my hat has that sign that says Stop Petrochemistry. And most plastics today come from fracking. Is everybody familiar with fracking? Fracking, is So you need bedrock shale to produce fracked gas. We don't have that here in Massachusetts, and we're lucky, I have to say, because it is really using tons of water and causing a lot of water pollution in the Marcellus shale region. So, New York banned fracking, but they do have the right kind of shale. But Western Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, and in that area. And this is a slide, obviously, from Beyond Plastics. They wrote a report called Plastics Are the New Coal. So by 2030, they think, it's predicted because so many of these fracking plants and cracker plants are being built, that the emissions from plastics will exceed the emissions from coal. Also, as we know, the coal plants are getting shut down. The last coal plant in Bow, New Hampshire, in New England, was just shut down. Is it totally shut down? And they announced it's being shut down. I don't know if it's totally shut down. It might be another year or something. So this is from the Oil and Gas Watch, which tracks all of this. This is how we know how many plants are online. To me, this is devastating news. Okay, since 2012, 481 plants have been built, but now there's another 529 that are permitted and in the pipeline to be built. Right? So all this work we're doing to reduce our emissions as cities and towns across the country to reach our climate goals is going to be undone by all this plastic production. Now we're moving into the environmental justice aspect of plastic production, which they touched upon a little bit in the animated video. So this is a well-known and amazing activist. Her name is Sharon Levine, here in the middle. She lives in what's known as Cancer Alley in Louisiana, in one of the river parishes there, St. James, and her community has been overtaken by these petrochemical plants. So they are spewing all these toxins into the air. You can smell the benzene and all the other chemicals that they're using to make plastics down there. And she has a great animated video that was made about her, talking about how when she was growing up in the 1950s, she's around 70 now, they had a garden, they could basically live off the earth. And a lot of these people, including Sharon, are the descendants of people who were enslaved on the sugarcane plantations in Louisiana and Texas. So I love this graphic because it actually shows you the outlay. The gold dots are where the sugar plantations were, and then you see the red dots coming in. Those are where the petrochemical plants are now. So one of the reasons the petrochemical industry went to this this is all along the Mississippi River here, is because they could purchase these large tracts of land, right? So a plantation was easy to purchase a lot of land, and they paid a lot of the white people for their land, but not the black descendants of the enslaved people. So this was made for the Atlantic Monthly, and I first saw it in a talk by Jo Banner, who works, she started a group with her twin sister called the Descendants Project, working on racial justice issues and environmental justice issues. And she's one of the people who will be up in Ottawa this week. Starting today, they're going to be talking about the Global Plastics Treaty, which is part of the Earth Day Planet versus Plastic campaign, right? So the Global Plastics Treaty is bringing all these nations together to address this issue, because this is a global issue. It's an environmental, ecological, and human health crisis, and it has a lot to do with racism. If it weren't for racism, we wouldn't have what are called sacrifice zones. We wouldn't have areas where we felt like it was okay to pollute areas where people are living. This is a quotation from Dr. Robert Bullard, who wrote a book called Dumping in Dixie, and he really got his start on solid waste issues. He's a black historian, sociologist. He's written 18 books. He's still alive. And actually that shows you, like, this is a real fence line community. If you've heard that term, fence line community, there's the fence, there's the petrochemical industry. It is not healthy at all. They have much higher incidences of cancer along that, obviously, the cancer alley. But it's not just happening in Louisiana and Texas. So this is a photograph from last year's train explosion that happened on February 3rd of 2023 in East Palestine, Ohio, which is where the Norfolk Southern Railroad, these are huge long train cars, so 53 cars derailed. And 5 of those cars were carrying vinyl chloride, which is used to make polyvinyl chloride plastics, and they decided, not thinking very clearly, to set them on fire. And this is a plume showing what happened when they set that all on fire. So now this is a low-income community in Ohio, and that whole community now is worried about their health. The water has been contaminated, the air has been contaminated, they evacuated it for a little while. One of the newer employers at Beyond Plastics lives in this community and is a public speaker about the hazards of the transportation of the chemicals used for plastics. So other cars in that train were carrying the little plastic pellets that are called nurdles that are the feedstock for making plastic. But these train cars are going from Louisiana, and then they come up, and then they turn and they go over to the East Coast into New Jersey. There was a similar train derailment in 2012 in Paulsboro, New Jersey. And this is the Shell cracker plant that is now, this is under construction in Beaver County, Pennsylvania. So that's not too far from the Ohio, it's all in the Ohio River Valley. So this plant was built with $1.6 billion of Pennsylvania tax credits to pay for this. So a cracker plant is where they heat up the ethane from the fracking until it cracks, and then it becomes into a product that you can use to make plastic. It's on 365 acres of land, and I was on a call like 2 days ago where they're saying they are now calling it the Cell cracker plant because it's not making any money and they're probably going to have to sell it. But as soon as it came online, it started contaminating the river. It's about 30 miles from Pittsburgh. And a lot of activists were trying to stop it to begin with, but I stuck that little Shell image down there just so you know that the biggest contributors to climate change are also the biggest producers of plastics. So companies like DuPont, Union Carbide, Dow Chemical, and then Exxon is actually, is that my next slide? Let's see, no. Exxon is the biggest producer of plastics, so we'll get to that next. So here we are at the climate crisis. We all know it's here. The earth is only getting hotter and wetter and drier, right? So we heard about this a little bit in the animated video. Plastics are the fossil fuel industry's plan B as they see transportation and housing becoming more and more fuel efficient. They're pouring all their money into this plastic. So anyways, there you got the idea right there, and you had that in that little video, and it's growing, and there's no plan B for the rest of us. So this is why we are seeing this kind of thing. So as nobody's demanding this, right? It drives me insane when I hear people say the increased demand for single-use plastics is like, how many of you have demanded that your cucumber be wrapped in plastic or your bananas put in a plastic bag? No one, right? But they just keep trying to find more and more uses. We had a campaign to try and get Trader Joe's to reduce how much plastic packaging they were using. And I thought, wow, we're actually seeing a little bit of difference. You can buy some apples at Trader Joe's now that aren't in a plastic bag, or you can buy a few onions or whatever. And then I was in there about a month ago, and this is not from Trader Joe's, but I started to see this, which they had never had at Trader Joe's before. Like, so frustrating. All right, so this is Exxon, get that in your head, #1 producer of plastics. This is also a startling statistic. So the two things that I always tell people when they ask me, like, what are the two, most salient points you can bring up about plastics? And one is that 50% were produced in the past 20 years, so we actually know how to live without all this plastic. And the other one is that plastic, if it were a country, would be the 5th largest producer of greenhouse gases. So that's more than all of Africa, Australia, the European Union, right? Plastic. A lot of climate activists, and I know many of you probably are climate activists, don't make the connection between plastics and the climate. Because, rightfully so, people are focused on the other issues that we've talked about, like housing and transportation. So this also just confirms what you saw in the animated video about recycling. So recycling is a completely false solution to the plastic crisis. It doesn't work, it never has, and it was a way for industry to get cities and towns to actually pay for their waste. Coca-Cola, #1 plastic polluter in the world, Exxon #1 producer, Coca-Cola polluter. They loved this idea of recycling plastic, because when I was growing up, Coke bottles were glass, refillable, return, refill. And then once they got to be plastic, they didn't have to pay for the person to pick up the glass bottles. They didn't have to pay for them to be cleaned. Now they get the cities and towns to pay for it all, right? And the other thing is, when you do recycle things, it doesn't get recycled back into the same product. Unlike glass or metal that can be recycled back into the same thing, it gets downcycled into something like a polar fleece jacket, and then eventually you can't do anything with it. But so again, 40% into the landfills, the environment. Incineration, and Massachusetts incinerates a lot of our waste. And there's a new big push for something called chemical recycling, which is a way of burning plastic. It's also called pyrolysis, or waste to energy. And we want to stop that because it's incredibly toxic. So you were talking briefly about bioplastics. In my opinion, they don't work. So most of the bioplastics, the compostable plastics, are made from corn or sugar as their basis, but they're still the same kind of chemical compound, which I think is what the next picture is. Yeah. So you have a basic carbon molecule bond, right, which is the backbone of plastics, and then all these chemicals are added. That's what those arrows are showing, how the chemicals are added, but they're just sort of floating on that bond. But the thing with a bioplastic is that bond, instead of being made from fossil fuels, is made from a plant-based material. It's just like old fossil fuels are old plants, dead plants have been dead a long time, but the other ones are fresher, I guess, but it basically the same kind of product. Also, there's no regulations around those words, compostable or biodegradable, and you really need to have a very high heat compost facility to melt these things down, and what do you get? You get a kind of sludge that really is not going to benefit your garden. So I think we need to steer away from the bioplastics and compostable plastics, but I actually have more to learn about that. So, oh yeah, let's just go back here. Well, I just want you to notice these phthalates, bisphenols, PFAS, flame retardants. You can't make plastic without these chemicals. Phthalates and bisphenols are usually used to make plastic rigid or pliable, and then the flame retardants you have to have because they're basically fossil fuels. They go up in flames without the flame retardant. So those that list of those chemicals, the PFAS, the bisphenols, and the other chemicals there are called endocrine disrupting chemicals, or EDCs, because they disrupt our endocrine system. They disrupt all our hormonal systems, and they are completely linked to all these diseases you see here. Breast cancer, thyroid disorders, diabetes, obesity. So there's also something called obesogens that are put into plastics that are connected to the obesity epidemic. The infertility rates are going sky high. Sperm counts are going way down. There's an incredible scientist. Her name is Shauna Swan. She's based in New York City. She wrote a book called Countdown, where she really outlines with a lot of research the connection between these endocrine disrupting chemicals and infertility and low sperm counts. But people don't want to hear this news, so she sometimes gets maligned. And the way these chemicals work is that they bioaccumulate in our bodies, and some people call them like hit and run exposure. So if you get exposed to these chemicals as a child or in utero, they can have long-lasting effects that you might not see for a long time. They're also linked to all these learning disabilities that we're seeing in children today, and more children on the autism spectrum. So we have the chemicals that are affecting our health, but we also have microfibers and microplastics. So first we're going to talk about the microfibers. This is an amazing photograph of a snowflake with a microfiber in it, and this is a microfiber in a plant stem. This is a brand new cartoon from the New Yorker. The waiter is grading up a credit card, and credit cards are made from polyvinyl chloride plastic. But this is not how we're consuming plastics. It's not because somebody's grading a plastic credit card into our food every night. It's because the microplastics and the even smaller plastics, which are called nanoplastics, are in the air we breathe now, the water we drink, and in the soil, like you saw that plant stem. This chart shows you that the worst way to the way to get the most microplastics in your diet is to drink bottled water out of a plastic bottle. So there was a study done this year that shows that the astronomically high rates of microplastics in plastic water bottles. Do not drink out of a plastic water bottle, and please advocate for the bottle bill, which won't ban the plastic bottles, but at least it'll get them off the streets, and the state should make some money out of it. But as you can see here, microplastics are in everything, even in honey, right? And then I love this photograph that shows all these teeny tiny microplastics on a bug that was found, an insect that was found up in the Adirondacks in a place where there are no petrochemical plants, and there's very little, there are not that many people, there's not a lot of industry up there. And then you've probably heard that microplastics are crossing the placental membrane. They're on both sides of the placenta now. They're getting into our blood, they're in our lungs, they're in our hearts, they're linked to heart attacks and strokes. That was one of the latest studies that came out just a couple weeks ago. They're connected to Alzheimer's. If you have a chance to see this movie, it's called We're All Plastic People Now. It's a brand new movie, came out by PBS, came out in January. I highly recommend it. I think you'll notice, even I, who had already cut out so much plastic in my life, was inspired to cut out even more, because it's terrifying how it affects us. And then I would be very remiss not to talk about artificial turf. So I don't know if you have artificial turf in Hudson, but
No,
this,
not
good,
yet.
keep
Not
it
yet.
out. You need to get organized and educated now, because they will be bringing it here soon. They are putting it everywhere. It's part of this whole Plan B for the fossil fuel industry. And artificial turf is made from a layer of what's called crumb rubber that's traditionally made from recycled tires. And a lot of activists went after the turf industry, just talking about crumb rubber. So now they have replaced it with organic infills. So some of them are like pine pellets. This is what in Watertown they just replaced the field with these pine pellets. They're still toxic. They still have PFAS on them. You cannot extrude plastic out of a machine, extruding machine, without having PFAS on it. PFAS are these chemicals that are on Teflon, no nonstick pans. They're getting into our drinking water across the state. They are in our drinking water across the state. That's another bill to support, is a ban on PFAS. But they also have all these other heavy metals. I mean, can you believe there's lead in plastics? I mean, I was shocked. I thought that had been banned a long time ago. And one artificial turf equals 3.2 million plastic bags. So for me, somebody who worked on the bag ban, I'm like, oh my God, I've been dealing with these fights about artificial turf for a little while now. Right now in Newton, I made this banner. Real grass is cool. It's cool. It keeps the earth cool, right? Artificial turf gets really hot. It creates heat islands. It creates a lot of injuries, abrasions, and again, it's connected to all these childhood diseases that we are seeing more and more. So if you're seeing this huge exponential rise in the production of plastic, you're also seeing this huge rise in all these health disparities, especially things like colon cancer, which are on a huge increase. So and this poster was made by Carrie Percival. She's an artist and an activist who lives in Malden. And in Malden, they have been trying to keep an artificial turf field out of a environmental justice neighborhood. It's actually low-income housing where they have this one grass field for these children to play on, and they want to cover it with plastic. Anyway, she just told me that she's starting to get bullied because of her artwork and the work that she's been doing on, it's called Friends of Roosevelt Park, that group that Carrie is involved in. All right, so we talked a little bit earlier about fast fashion and how it's the 4th largest contributor to plastic pollution. This is a picture I saw on the subway platform in New York City, and I thought it was brilliant. So this is an ad for the wool company, Woolrich, and it's like, wear wool, not fossil fuels. Some people think, and in California, they tried to pass a law that fabric had to be labeled what percentage of it was plastic, right? Instead of saying 95% cotton, 5% spandex, they could say 5% plastic, right? So people would really understand what they were buying. So most of these kind of textiles were developed after, well, they were all developed after World War II. But just so you know, those are all synthetics. These are all natural fibers. And I just discovered a really great website called Fiber Shed that talks a lot about why we need to work on these issues. So we're getting tons of microfibers into our wastewater, so when you do your laundry. So there are bills in front of different state legislatures, and I would like to see one here too, requiring filters on washing machines to try and keep some of those microfibers out of the water. So and this is a dump where all this fast fashion is getting dumped in Chile. It's in the desert, the Atacama Desert in Chile. So it's not just the issue of microfibers going into the waste stream, but all this stuff is getting dumped somewhere. Africa doesn't want our old t-shirts anymore, right? Massachusetts, you're no longer allowed to put textiles in the trash. So in Watertown, I don't know what you have out here, but we are partnering with HELP-C. Do you have that?
We don't have HELP-C, but we have a different one.
Okay, HELP-C. So, I mean, I'm on the Solid Waste and Recycling Advisory Committee in my town and volunteer on that, and I know that you can put like really, you do not want to put a rag that has turpentine or something on it into the HELP-C bin, but most other things you can put in there. A lot of people think of plastic as an ocean issue. A lot of plastic does end up in the ocean, and that's how many people are brought into the whole plastics crisis and working on it. I have a friend who works for Oceana, people with Surfrider, and that's one of the biggest concerns. And the Plastic Kills poster shows how it's affecting all those sea creatures, but there's actually more plastic in our soil now than there is in the ocean, and that's a fact I learned from the Earth Day website. And it's also in this fantastic book that's over there that's called A Poison Like No Other. It's about microplastics and how they affect our health. So there's now so much plastic in the ocean that pretty soon we're going to have 3 pounds of fish for every 1 pound. Now this slide is a little bit old. I don't know if this is going to be true by next year. I can't believe that's next year, but pretty soon there might be more plastic than there are fish. And then it is definitely an issue for animals around the world. So this is an albatross, and there's a whole island where the albatross were found dead and their bellies filled with plastic. So they often mistake the pink plastics for shrimp. But elephants are eating plastic in dumps in Thailand. Camels are suffering. Lots of different animals have been found and whales. There's an amazing movie called Coca-Cola's Plastic Promises. All right, so we got to turn off the tap, right? They said that I'm in that photograph. That's my bathtub in my house. So in the summer of 2022, I decided to organize, this is when I had first started my group, a big rally day. So July is known as Plastic Free July. It was started by a woman in Australia. And so in 2022, Beyond Plastics, we did this whole campaign. This is when we targeted Trader Joe's, all right? So I went around collecting single-use plastics from my neighbors, recycling. We have toters. We have these big toters that get dumped into the trucks that go around Watertown. But these things are called clamshells, right? The berries come in. You cannot recycle those. I mean, a lot of people think you can because number 1 and number 2 plastics, and I think what they're labeled a 1 or a 2, are usually recyclable, but those clamshells are not. All right, so the solution to this whole issue is to turn off the tap on plastic. We need to stop making so much plastic or we're gonna die. So this is, I'm in this casket, can you see that there? So this is a plexiglass casket. This whole concept called Death by Plastic was created by my friend Katrin Spies. She's based in New York City, she's a performance artist. I met her in the class that I took online at Beyond Plastics. And then that summer for that action, I called her up, I was like, can you come to Boston from New York? She said, sure, I'll come. She brought the coffin. It was a huge project. We set it up in front of South Station. So that whole action, we did a rally in front of the State House. We went to Trader Joe's. They have a corporate headquarters in Boston. I was so excited because I thought they were only in Pasadena. And it's downtown, so we could walk from the State House to the Trader Joe's headquarters, and then we went in front of South Station. But then I used it again for the Honk Festival, which is a great music festival, and one of the members of my group is involved in the arts component of it in October. And then I said, before I send this thing back to New York, I'm going to get in it. So this is next to my house. I used it for my Halloween card, and it was very humorous. And I took the poem by Edgar Allan Poe, The Raven, and I adapted it to being all about plastic. All right, so what can you do? Use your political power to make change. So I'm pretty politically involved in Massachusetts, and in my community, I'm on the town Democratic Committee, and I go to the state convention every year. But the picture on that side was in 2019, before the pandemic, when Markey was just starting to run, before Joe Kennedy jumped into the race, but that was at a fundraiser at a friend's house in Belmont. And then last fall, I didn't wear my necklace for you. So I made this necklace out of plastic straws I also found on the street. And I was at the state convention in Lowell, and I went up to Maura Healey because I was like, I want her to pass this bottle bill. There was a little party afterwards, and I got there early, and so then I was there. I was in this room with Kim Driscoll and Maura Healey and about 10 other people, so it was great to get the picture taken. So how do we affect change? So in 1970, that's when the first Earth Day happened. Everybody got into the streets, and it really had a huge effect. It was when the EPA was created, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act were established. But we need to keep doing this. So this is in Boston in 2019. That was in September, the school strike for climate. The momentum was fantastic. All the youth, everybody was out in the streets, and we were really building a lot of momentum. This is in early December, the first Friday in December of 2019, inside the Massachusetts State House. The Sunrise Movement kids were in there. This is all about the youth at this point. But I love Rebecca Solnit. She's a writer who writes a lot about climate issues. I love this quotation: "The revolution won't happen by people staying home and being good." That's why I like to get in the streets, but I've never been arrested. I stay away from that part, but many of my friends do. But I also, in September, I went to New York. So I went to a talk online through Beyond Plastics in July with Bill McKibben, who's on the board of Beyond Plastics. He's a big climate activist. He started 350, and there's 350 Massachusetts. The Westboro person, maybe you want to get involved in 350 Mass. And I heard them talking about this climate march, and Bill McKibben, I had heard about it a little bit. I thought it was just going to be like New York people, and Bill McKibben was like, no, it's going to be really big. Everybody's got to go there. So I was like, okay, we got to do a hub. That's what they were called, hubs. So all summer I went every Monday afternoon with all the other hubs from around the country. It was actually really fun planning it. And I worked with a friend who is in New York City. Her name is Jane. We had 200 people sign up to come, and we made all these signs. I really wanted people to start understanding that, plastic is all part of the fossil fuel industry. I'm here wearing the same dress. We've got the banners. See, you had these artifacts from the real thing right here in the room with you. Anyway, that was an amazing event. And that picture was taken by a New York Times photographer, and it got into the online edition of the paper that day. And the cover of the paper had a young person carrying that sign right there, not that particular one, but a blue version of that. So that was great. So Leslie and I felt great, and I really like the fact that this tells a story, right? Stop petrochemistry because plastic kills. If you don't know who your state legislators are, there's lots of tools online. This is more trash I found on the streets of Watertown. I made that several years ago. And all right, so these are the bills that Beyond Plastics Greater Boston is working on right now. I mentioned a little bit the PFAS bill that's being sponsored by Julian Sear and your friend Kate Hogan, or your not friend, I'm not sure, but I hear it's getting weakened right now. So we need to put the pressure on them right now that we want this. So we do not want PFAS in our water. It is completely linked to brain cancers. We didn't talk about this earlier about artificial turf, but there's a really good series of articles in the Philadelphia Inquirer linking artificial turf to glioblastoma, the brain cancer. So I think 6 of the Philadelphia Phillies have died before they were 60 of that form of brain cancer. And they have samples of the artificial turf that they played on because they were sold on eBay, and they're able to test it and see there's a direct correlation. Chemical recycling, that's the burning of plastics that we were talking about. We want a statewide ban. This is all part of the Plan B. They're trying to get around the Clean Air Act laws around incineration. This is the petrochemical industry again. There's actually a ban on the municipal purchase of artificial turf that has moved out of committee, so it's in the Ways and Means committee right now, which is great. Hope there's some amazing people in the state working on trying to reduce how much artificial turf gets put in this state, and there was a big success out in Williamstown not too long ago. So skip the stuff. Have you heard that term before? Skip the stuff is this catch-all that's used for all the single-use plastics in restaurants that you don't really need, especially if you're getting takeout. So like the plastic cutlery, the straws, the little plastic packages of ketchup and mustard and that kind of thing. Michelle Sicolo, who's a rep from Lexington, she has put forward this Skip the Stuff bill. It's also incorporated into some of these other single-use plastics bills. And then there's one, polystyrene is just another word for styrofoam. Many cities and towns across Massachusetts already have polystyrene bans. Many cities and towns, over 160, have plastic shopping bag bans. Beyond Plastics is shocked by Massachusetts. They cannot believe that we have this many bans and we don't have a statewide ban. New Jersey has really good statewide plastic reduction bills that have went into effect like last year or the year before. The bottle bill, all right, we're going to talk about that more later in more detail. Producer responsibility for packaging is also called EPR, or extended producer responsibility, because it's trying to get the people who make the stuff to pay for the final deposit, the final disposal.
They've been doing that in Scandinavia for a while.
Yeah.
So if you buy a car, the Volvo, Saab, those guys have to take it back.
Yeah.
And remanufacture it.
Yeah, and my state rep, Steve Owens, who's actually fantastic, and is part of the Zero Waste Caucus at the Massachusetts State House. He has an electronics EPR bill, which I think is really good. So for all the for the cell phones and computers and all that kind of stuff. Here, this is what we want you to do next, is we want you to write postcards. I love having postcard parties. We have this postcard here. This is why these bills are important, but I'll talk to you more about the bottle bill as we're hanging out, but we're almost done here. These are the 10 worst plastic polluters in the world. I already mentioned Coca-Cola is number 1, PepsiCo 2, 3 is Nestle. Unilever, I have to look this up. You were saying Polar Springs was just bought out by Unilever. I think I read that they actually decided that they're not going to use plastic packaging anymore, but I forgot to look it up before I came. But this is produced by Break Free from Plastic. They do these brand audits every year, which is how we know who is making the most plastic trash, who's contributing the most to the plastic trash. So when I heard Coca-Cola was the #1 plastic polluter, and I watched a movie about that too, and then I heard that the COP27, the Conference of the Parties, the climate conference in 2022 is being sponsored by Coca-Cola. I couldn't believe it. I decided to organize a march from the UN in New York City. We went from the UN. We had 20 people in the streets. It was super fun. I required everybody wear red, black, and white to go with the Coca-Cola colors. Another thing you can do if you're interested, you can join the FOCO Trash Mobs. This is an affiliate of Beyond Plastics. Maureen McCarthy runs it. She has all these kinds of sample letters where you can send plastic trash back to the person who made it. And then I like to use this in terms of action. So start small and then get bigger. So your individual actions are really important for yourself, for your own health, for the health of your family. But your virtuous self-actions are not going to make that much of a difference. I've been bringing my own shopping bags my entire adult life. It hasn't made any difference at all. You need to move beyond yourself. You need to work with your institution, your faith community, your town. And I like to think the big mama doll there, she's the Global Plastics Treaty. And so there's a lot to think about here. And I think it's time to organize and activate. And pretty soon, maybe we'll see an end to plastic pollution. I love this artist's work. I looked him up, and this image was created for the cover of Barron's magazine for an issue all about plastics. So you can join my group, Beyond Plastics Greater Boston. You can become part of Plastic Free Massachusetts. You can join the Beyond Plastics mailing list. They have lots of great things coming up. There's going to be a talk on May 2nd with Dr. Philip Landegren, who produced that slide that you saw about the polymer, the carbon bonds, and the chemicals. He's been studying health and plastics for decades. He is at Boston College. And if you wanted to become an affiliate yourselves, you could do a training. These trainings are actually like taking a mini plastic pollution course. Judith Enk's course this spring just started, so you're too late to do that. But I hear she's offering one again in the fall, which will be great. And then we only have one Earth, and this is a banner I made and put up in front of the State House for Earth Day a couple years ago, but I had it out yesterday also. I didn't take it downtown, but I did have it.
Can you go back to the plastic reduction legislation, because you didn't mention the last one, which I think is one of the ones that we really need to.
Oh, so the Plastic Reduction Act. So that is Rebecca Rausch's bill, Senator Rebecca Rausch. So that bill incorporates almost everything you can think of, including plastic car seats, which I think is a little far out. But so Rebecca Rausch pulled with her bill. She pulled out of her committee. She's the co-leader of the Environment and Natural Resources Committee. She pulled along all these other single-use plastics bills. So like the bag ban bill came out with that bill. The Skip the Stuff bill came out with that bill. But that's the most encompassing bill of all, the Plastic Reduction Act. If it passed, it would be amazing. The thing about the bottle bill right now is the bottle bill is part of the climate bill. So Senator Michael Barrett is co-leader of the Telecommunications, Utilities, and Energy Committee, which is in charge of the bottle bill, which seems a little confusing, but anyway, that's how it is. We are hoping that it stays in the climate bill, but there is a fear that it will be traded out. You know, people are like, oh, well, we want this and we want that. So pressure. We really need a bottle bill. Bottle bills work. They are the only way to get true recycling. If you don't know this already, glass in Massachusetts is not getting recycled into glass bottles. It's being ground up and used as landfill cover or put into asphalt. So I think the bottle bill will keep a lot of these nip bottles off the ground, because if you could get 10 cents for every nip bottle, I'll just tell you, Mary Lou Nicholson, who's part of my Beyond Plastics group, she works a lot with UMass Dartmouth students, and she made this incredible plastic monster with them last week. It was in a parade in New Bedford. Out of 35,000 nip bottles, they collected 35,000 nip bottles. Last year, she had them write out "break free from plastic" on the football field at UMass Dartmouth with all the nip bottles, and this year they turned it into a monster.
So just to say, the Plastic Reduction Act is now in the Ways and Means Committee, which is separate from where
Yeah.
the bottle bill is.
No, they're all in Ways and Means. So they're all in Ways and Means. They've all moved out of their respective committees. So they've moved out of like the polystyrene bill. I think the turf, I don't know what, the polystyrene was, and PFAS were in public health.
Yeah.
Most of the single-use plastics were in the Environment and Natural Resources Committee. Bottle bill was in the Telecommunications, Utilities, and Energy Committee. But now they're all in what's called Ways and Means. So if you don't know this, and I didn't really understand it until the past couple of years, Massachusetts is on a 1.5-year long cycle. Our legislative cycle is 1.5 years, and this session ends on July 31st of this year. So this is when we really need to be putting the pressure on. So when bills come out of their individual committees, when they get recommended out, they go into the Ways and Means, and this is where they fine-tune them, and they decide what they're going to leave in, what they're going to, what they're going to leave in, what they're going to take out. That's where I hear the PFAS bill is getting a little weakened. Why we need to put pressure on for that, and that's where like the bottle bill. What we would love with the bottle bill is not only to raise the deposit to 10 cents, not only for it to include all bottles, from nip bottles to 2-liter wine bottles, but we want refill targets, and we want percentage targets. So right now, Massachusetts is only gets about 39 to 40% of their bottles returned, which is far fewer than anywhere else where they have a bottle bill. It's like Oregon. What was Oregon like? Most of the other ones are over 60%, and in Europe they're close to 98% returned bottles. And you can use a glass bottle like up to 60 times. When you're buying
Just to
produce.
say about Green Hudson, that we tried last fall to get the health department to sponsor a plastic reduction bill, and they refused, saying we want the state to do it. So we're waiting to see if the state does, and if they don't, then we are going to bring a bill to the town meeting in November, and we will appreciate anyone who can help us in that effort. So hopefully it won't be necessary.
That's my philosophy too. Like people in Watertown kept saying, let's do a skip the stuff bill. Newton did one. Newton did a really good skip the stuff bill if you want to look at that online. Green Newton was very involved in that. But I'm like, well, I'm hoping for the state bill, but if it doesn't pass, we'll work on it in Watertown.
It's gotten further than ever before. So there's hope. I mean, there are things that are going on.
There are glimmers.
Many countries have banned plastic now.
Yep.
And you're talking about the clamshells.
Yep.
The berry companies, the biggest one is now making
Driscoll's, yeah.
cardboard for all the European countries, and Canada, go into Canada because they're banning plastic in 2025. So it's just a matter of getting our government to say no more plastic, and then they will make them for us too. So it's not impossible.
How successful are you to keeping?
Okay, so one of the reasons, that's part of the reason why I wanted to put some of these out. See those ones that say ban toxic PFAS now? They did say REI ban toxic PFAS now. That's why I placed those little trees. I had a little, across the top I had the REI logo, and then I reused them. So Beyond Plastics paired up with Toxic Free Future to ban PFAS and REI camping equipment and clothing. And we were successful. So a bunch of us went down to the REI in Kenmore Square in Boston, and we talked to the manager there. We stood outside with our signs, we took some photos, and look, they listened to us. But that was really a nationwide effort, but I like to think that we had played our own little role in it. The other thing that we did this year was one of the members of my group a year ago came to one of our monthly meetings and said, oh my God, I'm just so fed up with the Boston Aquarium, the New England Aquarium. They have so much plastic junk for sale in their gift shop. And she has 2 young sons, and she said, and they'd been taking classes there, and it just appalled her every time she walked. They're teaching these great courses, their whole message about plastic reduction, and plastics in the ocean, and then they're selling the stupid stuff in the gift shop. So I said, okay, let me go look into it. So I went down there. I could not believe it. Actually, my kids also took courses at the New England Aquarium, and my daughter, who's now 29, when she was 16, was a volunteer there and also led the whale watching tours doing educational stuff. And I couldn't believe how much more plastic they had than when she had worked there. And compared to when I was a child, it was outrageous. So we wrote to, well, I found out to whom we should write, and I wrote to these 3 people who are upper level positions, but not the director of the aquarium, and said, look, we want to meet with you, and we're very concerned about what you're selling in the gift shop. So they met with us in July of last year. So about 6 of us from our group went. Michaela came, the one with the 2 sons, and they said, oh, yeah, you're right, but they pushed back a little bit, but they said they were going to do something, and so it's like, okay, we'll give you 3 months. October, I went back, there was no change, so I wrote to them, and I called them, and I got no response, those 3 people. And then I said to Beyond Plastics, do you want to help me? And Beyond Plastics, we actually put together a petition, and we sent it to it was sent, I think, to everybody in New England who's on the Beyond Plastics mailing list. So like over 1,500 people, I think, sent them in. And then one of the women wrote back to me saying, why are you pressuring me? You know, I told you we were going to do something by January 1st. Like, okay, but you haven't done anything since July. So they have made a lot of progress. They actually got rid of all the stupid little, what they were selling in there were these teeny tiny plastic fish and tubes of plastic and a little plastic mermaid with her plastic goggles. I mean, it was, and then they had these bins full of tiny little plastic toys that were right near the checkout or kid height. They got rid of all that stuff. They still have polyester clothing, and they still do have some of those stuffed animals made from recycled plastic, which is still toxic. But anyway, I haven't been back super recently, but they have made a lot of progress. So I like to think of those 2 as 2 of our wins. And we've done a lot of education. I mean, I was downtown yesterday for Earth Day. There was a big party for the planet. And, you know, I met 4 college students from Boston College who were just like all ears to learn more. And I had been at MIT earlier in the day, and I'd seen a lot of plastic there. So I said, you know, I bet at BC they must have a lot of plastic too. And I said, oh yeah. And then I said, well, I'd be happy to talk to a group at Boston College. So they promised me in the fall they're going to get in touch with me because they're almost done with their semester. But, you know, just talking about the climate crisis, talking about the plastic pollution crisis really makes difference, right? And I think that art changes hearts and minds too, so I'm all about the visuals because I love getting my picture in the paper and the news. Just like, I mean, that's why I create these costumes, is to help educate people. So, you know, these days, if you're not, so much of the way people learn now is visual. So, well, I hope you liked that. I hope you learned something new that you didn't know before.